Nintendo, a quick-loading cartridge system with over 60 of the hottest titles ever. Games like Batman, a life-and-death struggle to end the evil Joker's reign of terror and save Gotham City. Games like Super Mario Bros.
By 1991, the Nintendo Entertainment System had reached the peak of its popularity and was soon to be replaced by the 16-bit consoles. However, in 1991, JVC in North America and Lucasfilm in Europe released Star Wars on the NES, another attempted retelling of the storyline of A New Hope, similar to the Famicom game. One thing many players note about the game is that the way they drew Luke means he ends up looking like a little kid. However, at least this time his hair is the correct colour. The game itself is a fairly standard but difficult platformer, with a few first-person spaceship segments on the Millennium Falcon and the X-Wing to break up the gameplay. Star Wars NES did attempt to provide different characters, allowing you to play as Luke, Han and Leia, who all play slightly differently in terms of firepower and platforming aptitude, with the droids acting as support, and Chewie only mentioned in passing. Overall, the game is as faithful as an 8-bit adaptation can be, however it is fairly standard and unremarkable, with only the Star Wars license giving it a place in time. However, console gamers were not the only ones to get a new Star Wars title in 1991. Heavily inspired by the 1983 arcade game by Atari, Star Wars Attack on the Death Star was released on PC-98 compatible systems, a popular chain of computers in Japan. The game features digitised voices and similar wireframe graphics to the 1983 title, and was very popular with gamers that played it, faithfully recreating the scenes it attempted to emulate. However, being on a computer that was in its waning years has meant that the game has largely been forgotten. In 1992, the only sequel to the NES title was released, this time based on The Empire Strikes Back. This time, Luke is more faithfully recreated, having proper proportions and better animations. The difficulty, however, is just as hard. The characters can fight with both a pistol and a lightsaber, and develops force powers over the course of the game. Despite being an improvement on the original, the 1992 release date meant that 16-bit consoles were quickly stealing the spotlight, and an NES adaptation of Return of the Jedi was never released. Super Star Wars was released in 1992 to critical acclaim. Similar to the original NES title, you play as Luke Skywalker, battling through the events of the original 1997 movie. Some allowances were made with the storyline to make it more action-packed to fit in with the platform genre, such as having to battle through the Sandcrawler to save R2. The game features several upgrades to the standard blaster weapons, as well as later on being able to use a saber. Taking inspiration from the NES title, you can also play as Han and Chewie in certain places, both of whom play slightly differently. Utilising the Super Nintendo's Mode 7 graphics, Super Star Wars features advanced vehicle scenes, flying the land speeder across Tatooine and taking on the Death Star down the trench run. The game has also been fondly remembered for its fantastic use of the Super Nintendo's sound chip, recreating the emotions the music created authentically and giving it a unique sound that has become a fan favourite even to this day. Super Star Wars was not only a brilliant Star Wars game, it was just simply a great game. In time, this would become one of the pinnacles of the series, and a game that not only all the Star Wars games were compared to, but all platformers as well. In 1993, Super Empire Strikes Back was released, expanding the gameplay of the original, but keeping what made the original so great, with multiple characters and Mode 7 sequences. This time, you had the choice of a primary and secondary weapon, and later on, after Luke goes to Dagobah, access to certain force powers. In response to the high level of difficulty found in the first game, a password system was implemented that let players continue at the level they had died, rather than back at the start of the game. Much like the first, reception was massively positive, and hope was high that there would finally be a full trilogy of the original films in video game form.
Now you can get Mega CD! Click, take this! It comes with 7 games and even plays your music 3D!
Okay, Megan.
In the early 90s, CD as a video game medium was beginning to take off. Several systems were released that claimed to utilise FMV video to increase the immersiveness of the gameplay, such as the Sega CD and Panasonic 3DO. Rebel Assault was released on the PC, Sega CD, Mac and 3DO as a rail shooter with pre-rendered CGI FMV backgrounds, with only a couple of newly recorded scenes. There are 2 distinct level types, one is in your ship and one on foot, however both are heavily restricted, allowing you to only move in a small radius. Rebel Assault takes place within the events of A New Hope, however you play as an unnamed farmer, Rookie 1, who must battle the Empire to save the Rebel cause. Rebel Assault is very much a child of its time, being one of the better examples of the FMV games out there, however it has not held up well over the years. Rebel Assault detailed the growing power of the Star Wars video games, which was constantly expanding into new genres and systems. One genre that not only did Star Wars expand into, but practically define, was the space shooter / simulator genre. X-Wing was released in 1993 and has since become a cult classic and a fan favourite of both gamers and Star Wars fans alike. During the game, you fly on several missions as part of the Rebel Alliance, including building intelligence and attacking and ambushing Imperial forces. The game proved hugely popular, generating 2 expansion packs which took the story beyond the events of A New Hope into the establishment of the base on Hoth. X-Wing came about when LucasArts designer Lawrence Holland decided to make a Star Wars game that took advantage of his experience of making a World War II simulators and was one of the first of its kind to use highly detailed 3D polygonal graphics rather than bitmaps. The game became a bestseller and won numerous gaming awards of the time, being described by Compute as the first authentic space combat simulator. It has since practically defined the PC shooting genre. That same year, Star Wars would make its long-awaited return to the arcades, this time being developed and published by Sega. Star Wars Arcade featured similar gameplay to the 1983 title, but with more modern styled graphics and gameplay. The game was later re-released as a launch title on the failing 32X Mega Drive expansion, and despite being fairly faithful to the arcade version, it has had a fairly lukewarm reception both at the time and now. In just the first 3 years of the 90s, 8 Star Wars licensed games were released, matching the amount released during the entire duration of the 1980s. The scope and genre of these games were massively expanding on a very quick scale, moving constantly into new areas and setting benchmarks and milestones that would leave other series catching up to them for years to come. Tune in next week where we continue to attack the 90s.